Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Ohio Grandparent Kinship Coalition Partnership Building and Resources Zoom meeting. Our moderator today is Dr. Ollie Jones.
Well, thank you so much, and welcome everyone to the Ohio Grandparent Kinship Care Coalition, State of Ohio, where we are excited about having another session on issues pertaining to kinship care providers and grandparent raising grandchildren. We have an awesome panel today. So sit tight in your seat, get your pencil and pen out to take notes, because we are very excited about the information that we're going to be sharing with you today. I am also the co-president of the coalition. Our first presenter is Ashley Davis, who is the chief of the Elder Connection Division at the Ohio Department of Aging. The Elder Connection Division is a community services and support paid for by the Federal Older American Act and other resources. They provide many services to the community, such as nutrition, transportation, caregiver support and health promotion, disease prevention, and many more things to that population. Ashton came into the organization in 2017 after working at the Ohio Department of Health, where she managed the Creating Healthy Community program. And that program focused on primary prevention of chronic diseases. As you can see, she has a healthy background and come very qualified to us today. Our second presenter, I may pronounce your name, your last name, I tried to practice. Blair, is it Schoeb? Awesome. He is the CEO of Areawide. Prior to his serving in that position, he served as the senior program manager at Public Strategics of Public Strategies and the director of the Oklahoma County Department of Training and General Assistance, and the senior vice president at United Way of Central Oklahoma. He served on the board of directors of the National Association of Area Aging Agencies, the Oklahoma City MAP Senior Program and Wellness Center Committee, and the Oklahoma State Council on Aging. He also comes with a healthy and exciting background. And then our last presenter is attorney Richard Darhar. I think I pronounced that right.
Pretty close. Dawahare.
Dawahare. Okay. I'm excited about this person because he has done some things to impact the state of Ohio, and so kudos to you. He's a graduate from the University of Kentucky College of Law in 1979. He began his legal career in 2008 as a sole practitioner focusing on family and elder law. He serves as a guardian ad litem for the children in the Department of Dependency, Neglect, and Abuse, where he represents families and adult guardianship proceedings and does estate planning and probate work. He also serves veterans and disability litigation and volunteers as pro bono. Awesome. He comes to you with a wealth of information. We're excited about our panel. We look forward to hearing from you. I'm getting my pencil and pen out so I can take some notes. Welcome, and we're going to go ahead and start with Ashley.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. All right, I'm hoping that you can now see it. Can you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate having some time with you this morning. In this virtual environment, I should kind of throw my picture up there so that you could see my face. So this is me. What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about our state plan on aging. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the National Caregiver Support Program and some additions that we have received from administration and community. Activities across the in support of ODA updates. Okay, so what is the strategic action plan? So as part of our 4-year state plan on aging, that is required Older Americans Act plan, and it really includes measurable outcomes to enhance the support and assistance for older adults, including older adult kinship care. So through the collaborative efforts of the 12 area agencies on aging, a network of aging service providers, as well as ODA, as well as ODA. So a little bit about the strategic action plan on aging.
Excuse me, Ashley?
Yeah, I'm having trouble hearing. Are you?
Yes, we are. I don't know if what is your audio that you're using, but if you could, we're getting a lot of feedback. Sorry.
I still hear it. Can you tell me what you see?
We do see your screen. It's when you speak, there's a fading in and out and a lot of background noise. So I'm not sure if you're using your computer to speak or some headphones.
I'm using my computer and I don't have anything going on behind me. Is everybody self-muted?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'll continue. I can continue, and then we have lots. Okay. Look, it sounds like it died down a little bit. Okay, so our the strategic action plan on aging is a prioritized and specific action plan our state and local partners can use to ensure older adults use their care. So a couple things I wanted to tell you about the action plan. Our strategic action plan has been developed on these 3 documents. Our state plan on aging, the summary assessment, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, and our state health improvement plan. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of our findings. So on June 1st, we were able to release a summary assessment of older Ohioans, and focus on a couple real statistics that are relevant and pertinent for and I will share that. So I'm going to go through some of our key findings of our summary assessment. The summary assessment was built on primary data findings from the 2019 to 2022 state prioritized set of secondary measures. So some of the key findings. So our first key finding is that the opportunity to live a long, full life is out of reach for many older Ohioans. Specific data around zip code level life expectancy differences. Different factors such as poverty, education, employment. Urban example, one within Franklin County between the 29-year gap difference as well. And you'll see that we have outlined it based on education, disability status, and I'm sorry, the background noise is just like a little bit. Real life expectancy difference, because we know that life expectancy are also disparate in rural counties. So here we show a Smithfield example, which is 20 miles from Steubenville, and you see an 18.5 year difference in life expectancy. Again, you see some of the driving factors, social determinants of health, social drivers of change, that really are the underlying cause of these. And we include some of those examples such as you know, race, ethnicity, disability status, education, and income. And this is one of our key findings, and we know is very relevant. There are resources that you can look at to look in your own county about some of these zip codes. You guys may have heard the term, your zip code drives your health outcomes more than your genetic code. You know, we know that these are critical pieces of our health. Another key finding is that housing and transportation, again, some of those really key social drivers, are incredibly important to strengthening and supporting healthy aging. And so you'll see that around 55% of households have housing costs that exceed 30% of their household income. And that is what is considered housing burden. You know, now even more relevant than ever with our pandemic, we see that housing continues to be, and transportation continue to be, these imperative social supports. All right, I feel like the background noise has subsided and I've kind of settled in a little. Another key finding is that while most older Ohioans can cover basic needs, many are not financially prepared for life after work. And so we did include some economic security pieces. And this one I wanted to spend a little bit more time on. All of these, there is a large report on our website as well as an executive summary. So I'd encourage you to go there to read in depth the report. But there is a section on caregiving supports as well as workforce capacity. So one of the outcomes that we have included in the summary assessment is a measure from the AARP Long-Term Services and Support State Scorecard. The key finding is that caregiver supports and workforce capacity, not a surprise, continue to be key issues facing older Ohio's aging population. So this AARP scorecard is a measure of policies, of how many policies your state has adopted. And those policies are family medical leave, mandatory paid leave, unemployment insurance, and policies. And so Ohio, as you can see, ranks 0 out of 9 on this scorecard. Another measure that is around the caregiver support section in the report is around policy for caregiver protections. And this is also from the AARP Long-Term Services and Supports Scorecard. And this is around the measure that whether states offer financial protection for spouses of Medicaid beneficiaries who receive HCBS, home and community-based services. And so we receive a 1.8 out of 5.5, but you can see that the best state in the country is at around 4.3. So we have a ways to go to support our working caregivers. Also included in the caregiver section is around workforce capacity. And so we did include the number of personal care and home health aides per 1,000. We did do a little bit a little bit better than the US average. And this statistics comes from the Department of Labor. And lastly, I wanted to share about the caregiver support. You know, something we held roundtables and did surveys and forums when we were developing our state plan. And these two findings stuck out quite clear, that long-term care services and supports for home and community-based settings is insufficient, and that low pay, high caseloads drive placement in institutional settings versus staying in the community. I'm going to go over, and I'm going to try to do it quickly because I know I have a lot to cover today. There are several other key findings. There is one key finding related to mental health and addiction, and the suicide figure for Ohio older adults. That's pretty stark. And then that chronic conditions, heart disease, dementia, cancers, continue to remain a concern for older Ohioans. And you can see the top 5 leading causes of cancer, and that the heart disease still leads our death rate in Ohio for older adults. If you want to dig into the report, you'll also find information on preserving independence, social connectedness, which again has even become more important during this pandemic, population health, and access to care. So this is where you can find the report. It is, again, this is what will drive our action plan that we are currently holding advisory committee meetings around. So we're excited about release of that action plan probably in late fall. And like I said, that action plan will be very actionable, targeted strategies that local and state partners can, get behind, take up, so that we can really all drive performance in the same way. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and this is more frequently known as the CARES Act. So as you may be familiar, the Ohio Department of Aging receives Older Americans Act funding for the National Family Caregiver Support Program. And that is, granted out towards the area agencies on aging who really provide that direct information, assistance, supportive services on the ground. A couple key things that I wanted to share with you. The Older Americans Act was reauthorized at the end of March. And so we were very excited to see that occur. The 2020 reauthorization did remove a funding cap for services provided for kinship caregivers. So prior to that 2020 reauthorization, we did have a statewide limit of funding for services for kinship caregivers, and that was 10% towards our Title IIIe allocation in Ohio. This really will extend the opportunity for Ohio's area agencies to utilize more funding to support the unique needs of kinship caregivers. And just a reminder that area agencies are encouraged and expected to design the National Family Caregiver Program and individual services that meet the needs identified of each caregiver. So with the CARES Act did provide some funding for the Older Americans Act around caregiver services. So the slide that you should see depicts the funding amounts. We received around $29.3 million from ACL, the Administration for Community Living, to fund the Older Americans Act. We've received 7.3 in supportive services, and supportive services is really some in-home care, personal care, transportation, those types of really vital services. We received over 17 million in home delivered meals, which, as you can expect, has increased exponentially, the demand for home delivered meals. And so we have seen quite the need to not only support providers in this area and their capacity to be able to meet the demand, with the end goal of meeting the demand of older adults staying at home. And then we received just over 3.6 million in Title IIIe, which is the National Family Caregiver Support Program, and just under $1 million for our Ombudsman program. Something that we were very grateful to see is that usually on Older Americans Act dollars, there are match requirements for local service providers, and that can create a burden and a challenge for local providers to meet that match. These dollars did not have match included, so something that we were happy to see. A couple other things I wanted to point out. We have some developed resources on our webpage around kinship care and the National Family Caregiver Support Program. So I have included links to that, and I can definitely share with Dr. Jones as well so that she can share after the presentation. But we have some tools that, some social engagement tips. This is some tools that we worked on with the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, as well as some caregiver fact sheets with one specific to kinship caregivers. And then we also have posted guidance on our website around the National Family Caregiver Program, and some guidelines around operationalizing that during these times. A couple other things that I thought you may be interested. There are 3 different initiatives that the Aging Network has released. One around it's called Staying Connected, one called Staying Healthy, and one called Staying Safe, all to respond to COVID-19. The first one that I'll talk to you about is the Staying Safe program. And this is an initiative that we have partnered with the area agencies as well as some of the emergency management organizations, agencies, to provide older adults with some critical supplies for COVID-19, and that includes some masks and hand sanitizer and other resources and services. So area agencies across the state are getting those vital resources out to older adults in their areas. Another initiative that the Aging Network has released to respond to COVID-19 is around the supply of home delivered meals. So we have seen across the state that some of the traditional meal providers are having difficulty meeting the increased demand for home delivered meals. And so we have launched a small business restaurant initiative that is to encourage the use of small business restaurants to offer home delivered meals. And those could be second meals, those could be meals on the weekends, and those could complement other home delivered meal programs. And then lastly, we have launched a Staying Connected, which is a daily check-in service for older adults. And this is really to support connecting to some of the local resources in your aging network, to provide a touch point for older adults. And there is also a friendly chat feature as well, that if the older adult would like to, can have a conversation with an employee. A couple real brief things. Right now, the Aging Network is positioning itself, and has been for the last 6 weeks, I would say, around the responsible restart framework. And so we are carefully reopening key Ohio functions and businesses with necessary precautions in light of the continuing pandemic. And these are the 3 guiding principles that the Responsible Restart Ohio are including, and that's protecting the health of employees, consumers, and families, supporting community efforts to control the spread, and to lead in responsibly getting Ohio back to work. So to date, we have seen the reopening of outdoor visitation at assisted living and intermediate care facilities. followed by outdoor visitation at nursing facilities. We are preparing for the reopening of certain functions at Ohio's senior centers and adult day centers, which right now continue to be closed. And so we are following a phased-in approach that really balances the need to prevent the spread of the virus with individuals' needs to connect. Lastly, as you guys are probably aware, there is a strong initiative to support wearing masks, and we know that reopening of these critical services for older adults depends on people being willing to take basic steps to protect one another, and wearing masks and maintaining personal distance are two of the best ways. So I ask that you continue to encourage those you work with and serve to wear masks and follow your local safety practices. So I can also share some, this is our website. I can share some of those resources maybe in the chat function as well, that I would encourage you to go to. That's all I have for you today. So Dr. Jones, I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen and kick it back to you.
Well, thank you. Were there any questions real quick before we move on to the second presenter? If not, we're going to go to the second presenter.
Well, thank you, everyone. Greetings from Oklahoma. I'm going to build a little bit on everything that Ashley shared, but it'll be more from the local level than from the state level. And we'll be talking very specifically about what the area aging agency that I run does for helping to support grandparents raising grandchildren. But I want to start out with just a little bit of information that gets to the question as to why we have this problem in the first place. And I don't want to dive too deep into the data. I'm a recovering data nerd, which is code for I can put you all to sleep within 5 minutes, given the opportunity. But Oklahoma is facing some unique challenges that have a direct impact when it comes to the challenges the grandparents find themselves in. And when you talk about the parents of the children, what we're seeing statewide, and this has been the case, unfortunately, for far too long, we do have a high rate of teen pregnancy and an accompanying very high rate of out-of-wedlock births. So many children enter this world with starting out with a single parent. Going along with that, we also have fairly low educational attainment rates. We have a lot of people who, particularly because of the teen pregnancy, they don't finish their high school degree. We also have one of the higher rates in the nation of people who start college but don't complete their degree work. So in a lot of cases, we have people who are reaching their adult years without the skills or the certificates in order to be able to have a career and provide for themselves. And then lastly, Oklahoma has a fairly high rate when it comes to drug usage. We led the nation for many years in crystal meth and also in the identification and destruction of crystal meth labs. And as a result of that, we also have a very high incarceration rate. For a good number of years, Oklahoma led the country when it came to incarceration of women. Many of those women were mothers, and so right off the bat, we were dealing with mothers who could no longer care for their children, and those children either went into foster care or went into somebody else's home. Oklahoma also has a very interesting situation too when it comes to caregiving. We have a significantly higher rate than the national average of people who leave the workplace in order to serve as a caregiver. Now, this is not just for grandchildren. It can also be for parents. It can also be caregiving for grandparents. But there's an economic consequence of this that frequently gets overlooked. And that's that while the people are out of the workforce and doing the caregiving, they're typically not earning a wage. They're not earning Social Security credits, and they're not earning credits going into any type of pension plan. So down the road, when they reach their 60s and they are ready to retire, their retirement income is not as healthy or robust as what they need. And then lastly, when it comes to the data piece, Oklahoma very much tends to lead the nation in a lot of bad health outcomes. In fact, the health outcome for our seniors, for people 65 and older, shows us to be the 47th worst in the nation. But we typically lead in smoking rates, obesity, high blood pressure, very high on diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. And an interesting note to add to that, Oklahoma has the highest per capita rate of fast food restaurants. We love our fast food restaurants. We go to them all the time. And in fact, we are typically the test market for new products coming out of fast food corporations. I can promise you I had a McRib sandwich before anybody else in this call. So for many Oklahomans, for the people that we work with, the people that we serve, here's what retirement can look like. They didn't make a lot of money during their working years, so they don't have enough savings. Their Social Security and pension benefits are frankly too low to cover their basic needs. Their physical capacity to continue working into their retirement years is also limited due to health issues. And while we hear a lot about companies wanting to retain older workers, to make accommodations in order to keep workers on the job, letting them work part-time or some type of seasonal place. Typically, those jobs are for people who already have a college degree. Those type of opportunities for seniors who don't have high skills typically are not there. So while we talk about people working into their elder years, there's got to be employment opportunities for that to work. Okay. This makes for a perfect storm. And we're all dealing with, every state is dealing with this. We've got parents who can't take care of their children because of bad decisions that they've made already in their lives, and grandparents who are already dealing with their own challenges. It can make for a bleak picture. And far too often what ends up happening is that the only thing that stands between a child going into foster care is a grandparent. Now, I can tell you I am a granddad. My wife, in her role as a grandmother, is an absolute force of nature. And I can certainly understand why grandparents will make any sacrifice they need to in order to make sure their grandbabies have a place to live and grow and thrive. So our job then becomes to help backfill them and to help with some of the things where they are dealing with some particular challenges. So I want to talk a little bit about that in terms of the services that we provide. Okay, like everybody else in the nation, we got to mid-March with the pandemic and everything closed very, very quickly, including schools. So grandparents who had their children in their home were suddenly tasked with wearing a lot of different hats, doing a lot of different roles. Many grandparents don't have computers. They've never had to do that before. They see it as a luxury. But now with kids going to the virtual classroom from the living room, computers are a necessity. That's become a significant barrier. And while schools might be able to provide a Chromebook or a tablet of some type, the grandparents still have to be able to get internet access, and that's an expense that many of them cannot afford. Other roles that the grandparents are frequently called upon to play in all of this, they now have to be the teacher, they have to be the tutor, school counselor, school cook, activities director, the special ed teacher, and the list goes on. If the grandchild, typically when we think about this, we think of a grade school age child, but that's not always the case. If the grandchild is a high schooler and is close to graduation, then the grandparents also have to step into the role of school counselor in order to help with college admission forms, financial aid applications, the FAFSA form, and so on. And these are very, very daunting tasks if you have not done that before, or for a lot of the grandparents, it's been quite a number of years since they've Many also relied financially on the free or reduced cost lunch and breakfast programs at the schools. Those are no longer being offered, so that's an additional expense that the grandparents have to pick up. And then lastly, and I don't think we can undersell this issue, a large number of the grandparents are anxious because of the constant news coverage related to COVID-19. They're worried about their own health, they're worried about their grandchildren's health, and they are physically and emotionally exhausted, and quite frankly, they could benefit from professional counseling, and some of the things that we do enable that. So for a number of years, my area aging agency has partnered with an organization called Sunbeam Family Services. Sunbeam has been in our community for over 100 years, and they originally started as an orphanage. But now they've expanded the services that they provide, and they literally cover the whole spectrum. They have services for all age groups. They have developed what they are calling their Grandparents Concierge service. And we've enjoyed working with them because some of the stuff that they have done is absolutely brilliant. And let me tell you about some of it. They have staff that works on connecting the grandparents with supportive services, kind of a one-stop shop model, if some of you remember that. They work on food and utility assistance, including connecting with SNAP benefits or connecting with the food bank and the food pantries. We recently partnered with Sunbeam through a project that came to us by way of Amazon, where Amazon was giving away 500 food boxes to seniors. These boxes weighed between 25 to 30 pounds each, and they had the makings inside for about 13 meals, or if you had a teenage boy in the house, maybe just one snack. But many of those boxes ended up going to our grandparents, and it was very much appreciated. We also work to make sure that the grandparents are connected to the government services that they need. And in this regard, most importantly, respite care or child care assistance. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago the role of therapy in all of this. Many of the children that Sunbeam serves through their grandparents' programs are already receiving therapy from trained counselors at Sunbeam. Sunbeam has pivoted very nicely and has figured out how they can continue to do both individual therapy sessions and then group sessions online through Zoom, very much like what we're doing here right now. It is not ideal, but it is certainly better than nothing. One of the things that they provide for caregivers across the board is support groups, and those are now virtual support groups. There's a fair chance that some of the grandparents are dealing with resentment feelings about this role that they're having to play. It certainly happens with all caregivers. And so a support group where you're in a room with other people who are dealing with very much the same challenges, and it's a safe place where you can share what you're feeling, is very, very important. So we've doubled up on our effort to keep those things going. We've also put a lot of effort into providing assistance with technological issues. As mentioned earlier, a lot of the grandparents have not had a computer until now. They might have an iPhone, but an iPhone is not ideal for virtual classroom programs. So one of the things that we do, we help grandparents connect with free or reduced cost internet access. We provide classes and one-on-one tutorials on how to use their computer. We've even done workshops with people on how to order groceries online, and since people can't get out. And then we include with all of that tutorials on internet safety so that the grandparents know what to be aware of and what to avoid. We facilitated grandparents connecting with telehealth, and we've provided guidance on how they need to respond if their grandchild has an IEP. and their role in all of that. Well, I emailed Barbara earlier in the day, basically telling her that a lot of what I wanted to say has been evolving over the last few days because the situation here in Oklahoma has evolved as well. Probably all around the country, we have schools who are making their plans and making lots of announcements for how they plan to open their doors this fall, come August or September. That has a lot of people very nervous, both teachers and parents and grandparents. Well, last night, the Oklahoma City Public School, which is the largest district in Oklahoma, has about 38,000 students, announced that they were going to remain closed for the first quarter. And everything that they do will be by virtual classroom. So it just reminded me, and I think it serves as a reminder to all of us that we need to be proactive in reaching out to the people we know who are in this place and are raising their grandchildren, because their work is just getting harder and harder by the day. Many of the grandparents that are out there are of the generation where it is very, very difficult for them to ask for help. And they may not even be aware that there is help out there for them. So I don't think there's ever been quite a time that those of us who provide services in the aging field need to be proactive in terms of reaching out to them and making sure they're aware of what we can do. Areas where they're going to need help, of course, are school supplies. Even if we go to virtual classroom, there'll still be things that the kids will need to have. They may need assistance with acquiring PPE, and that is a growing challenge. It was hard to find back in March and April, and it is still hard to find today. They may need help with school clothes, with connections with other supportive services, including some of the things that are offered through the Older Americans Act, as well as support groups. So that's the challenge that I see that we're living with now. I look forward to hearing Richard's presentation, and we'll be glad to answer any questions. Doctor, thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions? If not, we're going to move on to Richard Darhar. I know I'm tearing that name up again.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
excited about his presentation because Ohio has followed your suit in terms of the Glisson bill. And of course, Ohio has ignored the federal court decision requiring foster care payments to go to relatives. So I'm excited to hear about what's going on with you. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank you all for having me. I want to congratulate all of you for your passion, your work on behalf of children, grandparents, families. Blair and Ashley, of course. Barbara Turpin got me involved, and I appreciate her, and Professor Jones. And anyway, I will just tell you and review how I got involved. Of course, I spent right after law school, I went into our family business, retail. So I didn't do law for 30 years, but our stores were forced to close in 2008. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought about being a diplomat. I thought about other retail executive jobs. And then it dawned on me, I mean, if you ever looked at the civil service exam, it's daunting to say the least. I said, I've got something 99% of the people don't have is a law degree and a license. I kept the license. So I reached out to friends, and you get by with a lot of help with your friends. And one of those friends was a former classmate, a family court judge. And he said, why don't you be my GAL? I said, sure, what is it? I didn't even know. But through that, I became a GAL, and one of my early cases, I got these kids late in 2013. There were two young brothers, got them at separate weeks, different times, but the cabinet located a great aunt who could take them, but she could only afford to take one. So the boys were separated. And that was not good and an injustice. And so I was looking for a way to unite them. And hey, if she had payments, if she had these kind of foster care, I didn't even know what they were called. I didn't know the law. I just knew what was fair and wasn't fair. But I did know that relatives were not getting the foster care maintenance payments and non-relative licensed caregivers were. And so I wrote in the family court a motion to make the cabinet, that wasn't going to go anywhere, but it did get the cabinet to move and give her extra services. So she ended up taking both children eventually, but still the issue moved on after the case. I said, she's not the only one. There's a ton of relatives, no relatives are getting the payments they should be getting. So I filed a suit in state court, and I wasn't even licensed for federal court at that time, but I amended it because I knew it would be removed, it would remove it to federal court. And so I filed basically a Section 1983 action, made it a federal style complaint. It was removed to federal court. The first court ruled against us, the federal district court. And but let me, I'd like to share, can I share my slide? May be helpful at this point. Dr. Jones, let me see if I can do it.
Okay. If not, Lisa can help you with it.
Well, I'd like to if I could. Well, I'm not sure I can get to it. The slide would be ideal if I could get it up. Who helped me earlier?
Lisa?
Lisa, are you there?
Yes, I am. So what you'll do is you'll get the slide up on your screen.
Okay, I think
you want.
All right. Well, I've got it. If I put share.
And then at the very bottom.
That's it. Okay. That's it. Is everybody seeing it now?
Awesome. We can see it.
All right. Well, we will, it's easier for me to be able to talk about it as I go. So the parties in the lawsuit, that's me, RFD. I was a GAL, guardian ad litem, for the two brothers, DO and AO. They were removed from their mom, but separated because the great aunt could only afford to take one of them. RO is the great aunt. The party on the other side, well, I originally sued the governor and attorney general, but they were dismissed. So it's the secretary of the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services. And that has to be an individual. These kind of suits, you're suing an individual, the representative of the state in their official capacity. So, and I explained why it was started. I was looking for a way to reunite the brothers, and it just wasn't fair. So my first actual pleading was based on equal protection. It wasn't based on the law. But later that summer, and this case was over in court, and I determined that a lot of people need this kind of relief, that I did read the law by the time I filed the complaint in state court. So anyway, if RO and other relatives were getting the same payments that these non-relatives were getting, well, first, the children's best interest would be protected. They don't have, most of these relatives, as you know, are of limited means. They're going to do whatever it takes for their children. But the fact of the matter is it takes resources. And if a relative is stressed, and just the emotion, forget the supplies and the things that a child needs, the whole thing is a stress, and the children aren't getting the best, the relatives aren't getting the best, and it's not fair. The federal law is really clear. We'll get to that federal law in just a second. So I filed filed a motion with the cabinet. We went through that, and then I filed later that fall in the state court. The cabinet removed the case to federal court in 2015. The first court, the district court, it took them a whole year to rule, but they ruled against us in March of 2016. And the key point was this kind of cases you would think that if a statute's really clear, like 42 S.C. 672 says that foster care maintenance shall be paid on behalf of the child, that if that child isn't getting the payments, that they would have a right to sue and their relative. No, you have to have a private right of action. And so this court ruled, and they kind of looked at another circuit's, kind of copied another circuit that ruled against relatives, and said there's not even a private right of action. You know, they may or may not be getting messed over, but they can't even come to court with it. So that was the first big hurdle. And so I filed an appeal in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals that April of 2016. And we had oral arguments in December. And just very quickly they ruled. In January 27th, one of the happiest days of my life, they unanimously reversed the district court. They ruled first, and this is what I argued. I said, Your Honors, I think they seemed surprised to me that that the first court ruled there was no private right of action. I couldn't tell, but it seemed like I felt pretty good about that I was going to get that part of it. And they did. They ruled there is a private right of action. These children and this relative, they have a right to pursue their claim. There's a lot of factors. I won't get into the nuts and bolts of that, but I'd be happy to if you'd want. The court then analyzed this family's facts and compared to the statutory requirements of the foster care maintenance payment statute and found that the family met every requirement. And we're going to go over it. This is the statute. And I would encourage you to actually go. Just Google the statute and it'll come up. It's very easy to read. The first line, each state with a plan approved under this part shall make foster care maintenance payments on behalf of each child who has been removed from the home of the relative, of a relative specified, so it's usually the parent. If the judicial determines, so it's very important that the judges and the courts make these findings. They've got to find that continuation in the home of removal would be contrary to the welfare of the child. The court has to also find that the state, the cabinet, in your case, OCDJS, had made reasonable efforts to prevent the removal, and the child's placement and care responsibility must be with that state agency administering the state plan. Doesn't talk about official custody or any custody order, but the placement and care responsibility. Well, our clients met every one of those. Here's the third and fourth part. The child has been placed in a foster family home. So here's the definition of foster. This is very easy for me. Once I determined, I was going to go forward with some kind of action, before I even read the statute, then I read the statute and I said, oh my gosh, every fact lines up with my clients and with most of them out there. A foster family home means that it's a home of an individual family licensed, and that's what they typically, the licensed non-relative, they are the typical recipients of these payments, or approved. So it's not just licensed or approved by the state, the same state agency. So it's not just licensed family. That was the big deal, but they weren't following the law. And they still aren't. Ohio, we'll get to that. Ohio's still not. I haven't done a nationwide review, but a lot of states are not doing this yet. So we hit all the buttons. Now here's the last requirement, that this is the poverty requirement. The children must have come from the home of the removal. They must have been they would have had to meet the requirements of AFDC eligibility back in the 90s, 96. So there's asset, you can see that it can't have more than 10,000 in assets. You must be, it's essentially, if they qualified for food stamps, they meet this requirement. It's not the home that they're going into, it's the home of removal. So most of these children are in this situation, but still it's a requirement. So the Sixth Circuit held that the plaintiff children and relative, they were all plaintiffs, have a private right of action, that the statute is clear, it is mandatory. States must make the payments when the conditions are met. And they ruled in this case, all the conditions were met. And indeed, a relative foster caregiver is a foster family home under the law, just like the law says. So the only question was, we didn't have great proof in the record whether the children were still in temporary or permanent custody, because that's another once permanency is achieved, these foster care maintenance payments end. So it's only for the period when a child is in temporary relative care or fictive kin. I guess does Ohio have fictive kin? I believe so. That's where it may not be blood relative, but there's a long-standing emotional quasi-relative attachment that the child has with the person, and they can be considered as a relative and therefore be approved, not licensed. So on remand, the state readily agreed with me that the children were still in temporary custody, and that's what was happening a lot in the state, that the DNA cases would end with no clear, they would end with the temporary custodian being the relative. A lot of times these relatives don't even know. They don't know what kind of status they have with the child. Child is really still in limbo. And the federal law demands permanency. And as you probably know, permanency is either return to the rehabilitated parent, or in the case of a relative, permanent custody with the relative. And if a non-relative and the child can't be removed, returned back to the home, then a termination of parental rights and adoption. And not until actual adoption. So if that child was in a foster home, they keep making those payments until the adoption, not the TPR, but the actual adoption. And then payments stop if they return home, and the payments stop if they're with the relative, and permanent custody, official permanent custody. That's what happened. It's got to be an official order from the court after a hearing held by the rules of procedure from the state for having permanent custody hearings. All that has to be made. Once that's done, though, these payments end. So, but the state did file an appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States. It's called a writ of certiorari. But thank God the Supreme Court denied the cert, although it might have been fun to go to argue in front of the court. Maybe God will have that in plan sometime in the future, but I was very thrilled to win at this level. In other words, the writ of certiorari, the appeals to the Supreme Court are discretionary. 1%, maybe less than 1, very, very small percent actually the court hears. And so this was one that the court reviewed and denied cert, leaving the law of the Sixth Circuit in the law of at least for Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, and Tennessee, which are the states in the Sixth Circuit, intact. And so that means, yes, these relatives should be getting foster care maintenance payments on behalf, it's always on behalf of the child, it's really for the child. But naturally, this federal law has recognized for decades that they need, help. The kids need the resources, and the caretakers, substitute caretakers, need the resources. So this is not new law. In the 70s, mid-70s, this relative payment came from a case in the mid-70s, Yoakum v. Miller, a Supreme Court case that basically ruled licensure was not the key. Family members didn't need that as long as they're approved by the state, safe, capable. And that case was carried into the Child Welfare Act of 1980, a wonderful piece of legislation, bipartisan, and that's what all the laws, subsequent child protection, child welfare, family protection laws have evolved and are based on the Child Welfare Act of 1980. So the Ohio status, Ohio refuses to follow law. Ohio is not making any foster care maintenance payments to relatives. Now, I believe they are making, in some cases, a child-specific benefit. It's less than half of the rate they should be if they're getting that at all. I think there's some strings attached to that, and there shouldn't be. I reviewed it a year ago, and I haven't looked at it again recently. But Ohio's not making foster care maintenance payments to relatives. When my decision came out, I started getting calls from relatives in Ohio, and I wanted to be involved. I wanted to help. I actually had long communication with one. I tried to find attorneys there to help them. I was kind of busy. And then a year ago, Timothy O'Hanlon, who some of you may know, he calls me, out of the blue and says, he's very passionate about this as well. So he got me going again. And so more relatives contacted me. I actually have one now that is, and I've had her for a year, So I reached out. I actually have my papers to file to be a member of the Ohio Bar. But it turned out I found what I hoped was a local attorney well versed in these matters that was going to partner with me and his firm, and they were. Well, just a couple months ago, they pulled out. Why did they pull out? Your governor, in an article by Andrew Welsh Huggins, the Associated Press in February, basically promised that they were going to start following the law and making the payments, and they would release a plan soon. And so my partner said, if that happens, then we'll spend all this time and get nowhere. So they pulled out. And I've been everything's in limbo. I kind of go with the flow, karma. I believe in the spirit. And of course, I have other things to do, but we all do. The point is that now it's back up on the front burner again. I was contacted by a legal aid group out of Toledo earlier in the year, and then we've had some discussions. I didn't know if my client and her children, I kind of crossed my fingers. I followed up with them because she still has 2 children. They were due to go to permanency. But lo and behold, they have not gone to permanency. So I'm thinking if I can get, I think they hit all the right buttons too. They pass every other test. So I'm thinking that we'll be filing an action on her behalf. I've got a colleague in Cincinnati who's agreed to partner with me. And it's still a work in progress, but I hope to have something filed. I've tried, I want other people to do it. And there are some legal aid, you've got legal aid groups in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and they're on it too. They've got plans, and we may work together. I don't know. It's all a work in progress, but something's going to happen. You can't wait on the government. I don't mind spending the time. I don't mind spending my time to help bring justice. If we get something going and the state does end up following the law, which I don't think they're going to do it, but they might. If they do, I'll applaud them. I don't mind. That's good. We help bring positive change. And they're all good people. Your governor's a great guy. Kimberly Hall, your state people, they're all good people. They have good hearts. It's a system. It's systemic. It's budgetary. I understand that. Same in Kentucky. If they need help raising money, I've got ideas for them. And I've got a plan in Kentucky that it's going to take me time, and I'm working alone here. I've reached out to others for help. Nobody will help me. We got to get rid of these state tax incentives, corporate welfare. Do you know how many hundreds of millions and billions of dollars states are giving to private companies, businesses? A lot of them are very unaccountable. You're already giving it to people that are wealthy and have stuff, and it's yours and mine, our tax money. Just give us a little bit of that, and we can take care of the law, first of all, but also the most vulnerable of our citizens. We can take money that we're giving away. That's just one way. There's got to be other ways to raise money. If you got to raise money on higher income people, whatever it takes, that's not an excuse to not follow the law, and especially not following the law when we're talking about the most vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable citizens. Why government exists to begin with is to protect the weakest link, to make it strong. It makes everybody stronger. It only makes everybody stronger, and it happens to be the law. So. It is what it is. So they're good people. It's systemic, but we're going to do what we can to bring positive change. And so I put on here the next step. I think it's going to take a lawsuit to force compliance. But you know what? We never want to shut our mind to other opportunities. One thing could be continued dialogue with the governor and the director. And maybe public prayer, maybe something will happen if you get, maybe get the business community. Who knows? I get the legislators to do. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, but let's face it, it's been decades and they're not following the law, so something's got to happen. And you would have thought after this DOV Glisson decision, the state would do it, but they're not. And then I put yay. So I'll be glad to take any questions. Maybe I missed something.
Awesome presentation. Thank you for that healthy information as we continue to fight the cause here in Ohio. Are there any questions?
I appreciate you all. Thank you very much for coming and listening, and for what you're doing. The real heroes are the grandparents, that's for sure.
Are there any questions?
I have a question. My name is Donna Jones, and I'm a grandmother with custody of a 16-year-old child. I'd just like to address what the group is doing to basically force the hand of the governor and the state. I am a grandparent that is still employed and a grandparent with a child that comes from a low-income household that I am over income for any help with her. So I'd just like to know what the Grandparents Coalition is doing together constructively, that I think if we came in numbers that maybe we could potentially get something done, because everything that each presenter has talked about, when you have a 16-year-old child in your home and you are still employed, there is a measure of every agency within the state of Ohio, or where you try to get help, where some people don't understand. She is a separate individual, but has been denied for everything. So it's a lot for a 60-year-old woman to go into the high schools to make sure that she is meeting her marks. But it is doubly difficult when a child comes to you with nothing. I mean, no clothes, no furniture, no anything. So my question is, what are we doing as a group to address Governor DeWine and not?
As a coalition, the Ohio Kinship Care Coalition, myself and some of the officers, Ron Varga, I think Varga, we went and met with Ms. Hall around the process in terms of getting this in place. That dialogue did not go very well. They need, quote unquote, needed more time to work out some things. And I think I have Ron on the phone if you want to jump in and add to what I'm saying. And so we were waiting for them to get back to us so we can sit down with them and have further dialogue. And then the coronavirus showed up. And so we're at a standstill. So we're hoping that we can move beyond that and continue that dialogue to actually begin to get this in place for those who have a right to those supportive services.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Ms. Jones, Dr. Jones is correct. We did meet with Director Hall and some of her staff, and they did indicate that they were working to try and come up with a implementation plan. We know that COVID has slowed a lot of things down, but we are still engaging with the department to try and get an understanding, a better sense of what time frames look like in terms of implementing and making sure that that is still the plan. We are, however, also working with Richard. So Richard did mention that he's been in touch with some of the legal aides. The coalition and the federation has been talking with a number of our legal aides around the state to make sure they know about the work that Richard did in Kentucky, and that's why they're interested in really working with him and trying to see what other avenues, because I think we have to look at this as a multi-pronged strategy. It can't just be one strategy. I think we have to look at it in ways of, there may be conversation with the department, maybe conversation with the governor, but then there may also need to be this strategy that sits out there that says we do go into court and force the issue, and as well as other strategies, talking with legislators. We have also set up meetings with some of our legislators to talk with them, to let them know sort of what these issues are and why it is so important and imperative that grandparents and other relatives get these supportive services that they need, because as you mentioned, we do realize and we recognize that when you step forward and bring your children into the home, you do take on a great risk. I mean, as Brian mentioned earlier and Ashley mentioned, sometimes you're not financially ready to bring children in your home, but you don't have that option because you don't want them ending up in foster care. So you say yes and you bring them in the home, but you don't necessarily have the resources you need. And so we are working as a coalition, and we will continue to advocate on behalf of families to make sure that this gets implemented. We are committed 100% to seeing this through. And as I said, we are going to work with the department. We have some department representatives on the line on this call today with us. And so they've heard Richard's presentation. They're hearing what we're saying. And this is nothing new to them. I believe that, as Richard mentioned, I think everybody wants to do the right thing. They're just budgetary constraints. But at the end of the day, as Richard mentioned, we can find money to give to corporations to do other things. We can find money to help families when they're coming forward with their children. And that's the position that the coalition takes.
I have another question. Part of the argument, frankly, is everything I just mentioned, but this wasn't included in my Kentucky lawsuit. There's a racial inequity concern here too, and I've been. I'd like to know. I have much more to learn in terms of the racial breakout of children and relatives who are the DNA children and relatives by racial breakdown. My hypothesis is that it probably hits the minority community much greater. And the denial of these laws affecting everybody, but particularly these minorities in a greater force. I don't know that. I don't have the information in Ohio. But perhaps you could help me get that information.
Okay. We can definitely talk with you about that later and try and get that for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
any other questions? Now we have all at some point been kinship care providers. For those who are working with the coalition, who are officers, they are kinship care providers. Some of them are kinship care providers. They are adoptive families as well. And so we feel your urgency, and we also understand your pain and your challenges.
the grandparents and the caregivers are the real heroes, and you that support them, all of you, I applaud you. You all, and that's kind of what states have been doing, leveraging the hearts of relatives, and getting a free ride based on that love and affinity. They're going to do, relatives will do anything for those children, and never stop doing that. God will, you're getting reward in heaven, but you're not after it for the money. Never feel guilty for it. But let's face it, these children need all that we can give them, and they come from poor homes. They come from poor homes. That's part of the law. And so, anyway, never feel good about what you're doing. Money's not the end object, but you need help, and we want to do what we can to help you. And thank you for all you're doing.
Any other questions that anyone have that's on the conference line? Don't be shy. I don't want you to leave here and you have a question that you say, oh, I should have asked that question.
I'm going to leave my slide with somebody somehow. My information will be on that if somebody has a question.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, does any other officers have anything that they would like to say before we leave? Any other coalition officers that's on the line would like to have anything to say?
This is Georgetta Lake. I would just like to thank you for the presentation. It's been very informative and I really appreciate it.
Well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, I want to thank all the presenters for the healthy and wealth information that you provided today. We hope that in the future, if we need you, that we can reach out to you. If you need us for anything as a coalition, please feel free to reach out to us. We're all in this together. thank you again, and you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for all your information.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.